The silence before the stormed cameras flashed as Keanu Reeves stepped out of the black car, the cool evening air brushing against his face. The premiere lights painted the city in gold and silver, and the crowd roared for the man who had once been called the kindest soul in Hollywood. He smiled gently, waved politely, and walked toward the red carpet. But his eyes weren't searching for cameras or reporters. They were searching for one person, Sandra Bullock. They had shared a magical connection years ago during a film shoot. They had laughed between takes, shared late-night conversations, and built a bond that many believed was deeper than friendship. But life had taken them in different directions. Careers, relationships, time, all had created distance. Yet deep down, Keanu never stopped caring. He spotted her from a distance that night. Elegant, graceful, surrounded by people. She was laughing, her smile radiant under the bright lights. Keanu's heart warmed just seeing her, but as he approached, something unexpected happened. She turned her back. Number wave, no smile, not even a polite nod. She simply looked away. For a moment, the noise of the crowd faded. The cheers dimmed, and in that silence, Keanu felt something sting deep inside. It wasn't anger. It was something gentler, something sadder, disappointment. People noticed. Whispers spread like wildfire. Did she just ignore him? Aren't they friends? Maybe something happened between them. Keanu pretended not to notice, his face calm, his movements collected. He greeted the photographers, posed for the cameras, and answered questions with his usual kindness. But inside, a storm had begun to brood out later. At the after-party, Keanu found himself standing alone by a large window overlooking the city. He held a glass of sparkling water and stared at the skyline. Everyone was celebrating, laughing, talking, dancing. But he felt out of place. "Hey man, you all right?" His co-star asked, clapping him on the shoulder. "Yeah," Keanu said with a soft smile. Just taking a breather, but the truth was more complicated. He kept replaying that moment. Her glance, the way she turned away, the coldness in her eyes. Had he done something wrong? Was there something he had missed? He decided to approach her before the night ended. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Maybe there was something she wanted to say, but couldn't. When he finally found her, she was surrounded by a group of producers and friends. Laughter floated around her like music, and she seemed truly happy. Keanu waited until there was a pause in the conversation before stepping closer. "Hi, Sandra," he said gently. She looked at him for the first time that night. Her expression was neutral, polite, but distant. "Oh, hey," she replied, her tone cool and formal. "It's been a while," Keanu said, trying to keep the warmth in his voice. "Yeah," she nodded. "It has." Silence stretched between them. A silence that was once filled with shared jokes and easy conversations now felt heavy and uncomfortable. "I just wanted to say it's good to see you," he continued. "I hope everything's going well." "Thanks," she said shortly, then excused herself to talk to someone else. Keanu stood there, feeling the weight of rejection settle in his chest. It wasn't dramatic. There was no confrontation, no argument, just silence, cold and distant. Most people would have felt bitter. Most would have walked away with resentment. But Keanu wasn't like most people. As he left the party that night, he told himself something important. Everyone is fighting a battle we cannot see. Maybe she's going through something. Maybe it's not about me at all. And with that thought, instead of anger, he chose understanding. Instead of resentment, he chose compassion. The days that followed were a test of that choice. Headlines screamed about the awkward reunion between the two stars. Gossip sites speculated about a secret feud. Fans debated online. Some even blamed Sandra, calling her ungrateful. But Keanu never spoke a single harsh word. When asked by a reporter about the situation, he simply smiled and said, "People change. Life changes. But kindness never goes out of style." Those words went viral. People admired his grace, his humility, and his ability to respond with kindness even when he had every reason to feel hurt. But what no one knew was that his quiet response would set in motion a series of events. Neither he nor Sandra could have imagined. A week later, something unexpected happened. A handwritten note arrived at Keanu's doorstep. Number, name, no return address, just a simple envelope. Inside, in familiar handwriting, were 6 words. "I'm sorry. I wasn't myself." Keanu stared at the note for a long time. It wasn't much. It didn't explain anything. But it was enough. It was a small bridge, a tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, things weren't as broken as they seemed. He wrote a simple reply and left it unaddressed, knowing it would find its way back to her. No need to apologize. I'm still here. It was a small act, quiet, humble, and sincere. But that small act would be the beginning of something far bigger than either of them could see. Because sometimes, the most powerful moments don't come from grand gestures. They come from kindness in the face of pain. They come from understanding instead of judgment. They come from choosing compassion when rejection would be easier. And in that quiet exchange of words, a new chapter was about to begin, one that would challenge their hearts, test their strength, and teach them both the true meaning of grace. The message behind the silence days after the note arrived felt different for Keanu. Not because anything dramatic had happened. There were no calls, no sudden visits, no media statements, but because, deep down, something had shifted. The weight of uncertainty that had been pressing on his chest since that night at the premiere had started to lift. Those 6 words, "I'm sorry, I wasn't myself," carried more meaning than most people would ever understand. He didn't know what had caused Sandra's distant behavior, and he didn't need to. Forgiveness, to him, was not about conditions. It was about choosing peace over pride, and in that choice, he felt lighter. Still, something inside him remained unsettled. There was a question that refused to leave his mind. What had changed her so much that she couldn't even look him in the eyes? He didn't chase the answer. He simply continued with his life, his quiet routines, his motorcycle rides, his charity visits, and his long walks alone. But the universe has a way of bringing people together when their hearts are not ready, but meant to meet. And so it happened, 2 weeks later, in a place neither of them expected. It was a Saturday afternoon. Keanu was volunteering at a local children's hospital, reading stories and signing autographs for the kids. He had always preferred this kind of joy, the kind that didn't involve cameras or interviews. As he walked down the hallway, a nurse stopped him. "Mr. Reeves," she said with a gentle smile. "Someone's here to see you." He turned, curious, and there she was, Sandra, standing at the end of the hallway, her hands clasped nervously in front of her, her eyes searching for his dot. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. She wasn't the glamorous star he had seen at the premiere. She looked softer, quieter, almost fragile. "Hi," she said softly when he approached. "Hi," he replied, his tone warm but cautious. "Can we talk?" she asked. They found an empty bench by the hospital garden. The autumn wind carried the scent of fallen leaves, and children's laughter echoed in the background. For a long time, neither of them spoke. It was as if they were both searching for the right place to begin. "I owe you an explanation," Sandra finally said, her voice trembling slightly. "About that night, and about how I acted." "You don't owe me anything," Keanu said gently. "Yes, I do," she insisted. "Because the truth is, it wasn't about you. It was about me. I was going through something and I didn't know how to face anyone, especially you." Keanu remained silent, giving her space to speak. "A few months ago," she continued, "my mother got very sick. I didn't tell anyone. I thought I could handle it while working, while keeping up appearances. But I couldn't. I was exhausted, angry, scared, and when I saw you that night, all of it just hit me at once. I turned away not because I didn't care, but because I was too broken to pretend." Keanu's heart ached at her words. He understood that kind of pain, the kind that isolates you even in a room full of people. He had lost people too. He had carried grief that words couldn't explain. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. "You didn't deserve that." He looked at her, his eyes soft and understanding. "We all break sometimes. It's not something to apologize for." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "But I hurt someone who's always been kind to me. That's not something I can just forgive myself for. Maybe forgiveness isn't about deserving," he said quietly. "Maybe it's just about choosing to move forward." The words hung in the air like a fragile truth. Sandra took a deep breath, and for the first time in months, she smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "You always know what to say," she murmured. "I don't," he replied softly, "but I know what not to hold on to." They sat there in silence for a while, watching the leaves dance in the wind. It wasn't the same as it used to be, the easy laughter, the shared jokes, the effortless bond. But it was something new, something deeper, a connection born not from light moments, but from shared vulnerability. Before they parted ways that day, Sandra asked a question that caught Keanu by surprise. "Can we start over?" she asked, almost shyly. "As friends, I mean. No past, no expectations. Just to people trying to do better. Keanu smiled. I'd like that. And so, they did. Their friendship began again, not as a continuation of what was, but as a new beginning. They started with simple things, coffee meetings, charity events, long phone calls about life and loss. They spoke less about their careers and more about their fears, their dreams, and the lessons they had learned along the way. But the deeper they talked, the more Sandra realized something about Keanu, something she had always known but never truly understood. He was not just kind because it was easy. He was kind because he had known pain and chose compassion anyway. He had every reason to be bitter at the world, at the losses he had suffered, the betrayals he had faced. But he wasn't. He carried no anger, no resentment, only empathy. And that, more than anything, began to change her. Weeks turned into months, and soon, the world started to notice. They were seen together again, laughing, smiling, walking side by side. Rumors of a reunion spread, but neither of them cared. They weren't interested in headlines. They were building something real, a friendship grounded in understanding and respect. But fate, as it often does, had more in store for them. Because just as things began to feel steady and peaceful, a piece of news arrived that would shake Sandra's world once again, and this time, Keanu would be the one to stand by her when everything started to fall apart. When the world turned upside down. Phone rang just after midnight. Sandra was lying on her couch, half asleep with an old movie playing softly in the background. She had spent the evening texting Keanu about a charity project they were planning together. It felt good, this new version of their friendship, lighter, warmer, safe. But that call shattered the peace. Miss Bullock, came the trembling voice of a nurse on the other end. Your mother's condition has worsened. We need you to come to the hospital immediately. The world seemed to tilt beneath her. Her hands shook as she grabbed her coat and keys. The drive to the hospital felt like an endless blur of red lights and cold air. And by the time she reached the intensive care unit, her heart was pounding painfully in her chest. The doctor's words were gentle, but heavy. She's stable for now, but the next 24 hours are critical. We're doing everything we can. Sandra sat beside her mother's bed, holding her frail hand. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks as memories flooded her mind. Childhood laughter, bedtime stories, moments of comfort during heartbreaks. Her mother had always been her anchor. And now, that anchor was slipping away. By morning, her phone was full of unread messages, calls from her team, producers, friends. But one name stood out, Keanu. He had texted 3 times, just checking in. Hope you're okay. I'm here if you need anything. Should I come to the hospital? She hadn't replied, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know how to let someone into this kind of pain. But Keanu, being who he was, didn't wait for permission. By noon, he was there, standing quietly at the end of the hallway with a small bag of snacks, a cup of coffee, and a kind of calm presence that made everything feel slightly less unbearable. You didn't have to come, she said, trying to smile through her exhaustion. I know, he replied softly, but you don't have to go through this alone. They sat together in the sterile hospital corridor, sharing quiet conversations and long silences. He didn't try to fix anything. He didn't offer empty reassurances. He was simply there, steady, patient, and kind. As hours turned into days, Sandra's world became a loop of hospital visits, doctor upgrades, and sleepless nights. And through it all, Keanu stayed by her side. He brought her meals when she forgot to eat. He drove her home when she was too tired to drive. He listened when she needed to talk and respected her silence when words were too heavy. But it wasn't just his actions that comforted her. It was his understanding, a deep, unspoken understanding born of his own losses. One evening, as they sat in the hospital garden watching the sunset, she asked him something she had never asked anyone before. How do you do it? She whispered. How do you stay so strong when life keeps hurting you? He thought for a moment before answering. I don't think I'm strong, he said quietly. I just learned that pain doesn't mean the end. Sometimes it's just the beginning of understanding what really matters. She looked at him, and for the first time, she saw beyond the public image, beyond the kind smile and gentle words. She saw the scars beneath, the quiet strength forged from suffering, and the resilience that had shaped the man sitting beside her. In that moment, something shifted in her heart. It wasn't love, not yet. It was something deeper, quieter. It was trust, and that trust would become the foundation for everything that followed. But life, as always, had a cruel sense of timing. Just when things seemed to be improving, just when hope began to flicker again, everything changed. One night, Sandra received a call that shattered her world. Her mother had suffered a massive stroke. Despite the doctor's best efforts, there was nothing more they could do. The next morning, Sandra stood in the cold hospital room, staring at the empty bed where her mother had once been. Grief came in waves, some soft and quiet, others violent and consuming. She felt lost, hollow, like a part of her had been ripped away. Keanu arrived soon after. He didn't speak. He simply wrapped his arms around her as she broke down, sobbing into his chest. He held her like he had promised himself he would never let anyone fall alone. And for hours, they stayed like that, two souls connected not by words, but by shared sorrow. In the weeks that followed, Keanu became her anchor. He handled calls from reporters, shielded her from public scrutiny, and helped with funeral arrangements. He sat with her when she couldn't sleep and made her laugh when she thought she'd never smile again. Slowly, the darkness began to lift, and when it did, Sandra saw him, truly saw him, in a way she never had before. This man who had every reason to walk away had stayed. This man she had once ignored had chosen compassion over pride, and in that choice, he had become the most important part of her healing. One evening, as they walked through the park where she and her mother used to spend afternoons, Sandra stopped and turned to him. "You've done so much for me," she said softly. "I don't even know how to thank you. You don't need to," he replied with a gentle smile. "That's what friends do. But you're more than a friend," she whispered before she could stop herself. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. The air between them grew heavier, charged with something unspoken, something neither of them was ready to name, but destiny, as if listening, was already writing the next chapter. Because what started as an act of kindness was about to evolve into something deeper, something that would challenge them both in ways they never expected. Hearts on the edge of weeks after the funeral passed in a slow, strange rhythm. Grief had softened into silence, and silence had become a strange kind of comfort. Sandra tried to return to normal life, auditions, interviews, meetings, but everything felt different now. The world moved forward, but a part of her was still standing in that hospital room, holding her mother's hand for the last time. Through it all, Keanu remained her steady presence. He didn't push her to be okay. He didn't tell her to move on. Instead, he showed up, with coffee on early mornings, with long walks through the city at night, with quiet conversations that didn't need to fix anything. And slowly, she realized something she hadn't before. She wasn't healing alone. One evening, weeks later, they sat together in her living room, an old jazz record playing softly in the background. Rain tapped gently against the windows. Sandra was curled up on the sofa with a blanket, and Keanu was reading a book beside her. It was peaceful, almost domestic, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like something more than friendship. "You know," she said suddenly, breaking the silence, "I used to think I had everything figured out. Career, life, happiness. But losing her, it made me realize how much I was pretending." He looked up from his book, listening. "I built walls around myself," she continued. "I thought if I stayed busy, if I kept smiling, if I stayed strong, nothing could hurt me. But it did. And now, I don't even know who I am without her." Keanu set the book aside and shifted closer. "Maybe you don't need to know yet," he said softly. "Maybe it's okay to be lost for a while. Maybe that's how we find the real parts of ourselves, in the quiet, in the confusion." She looked at him, her heart tightening at the kindness in his eyes. "How do you do that?" she asked. "Do what?" "Make everything sound less scary." He smiled. "Because I've been lost too, and I know it doesn't last forever." Their eyes held for a moment longer than either expected. The air between them shifted, heavier, warmer, and in that silence, something neither of them wanted to name stirred beneath the surface. Days turned into weeks, and their friendship deepened. They saw each other almost every day, dinners, walks, late-night talks, and with each shared laugh and lingering glance, their connection grew more complicated. But feelings, no matter how deeply they're buried, have a way of demanding to be felt. One evening, after a charity gala, they ended up walking along the river. The city lights shimmered on the water, and the cool night air carried a hint of autumn. Sandra was quieter than usual, her thoughts far away. "What's on your mind?" Keanu asked gently. She hesitated before answering. "Do you ever wonder why people come into our lives?" "All the time," he said. "Sometimes they're there to teach us, sometimes to break us, and sometimes to help us put the pieces back together." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "And which one am I to you?" He looked at her, his heart beating faster than he wanted to admit. "You're the part I didn't know was missing," he said softly. The world seemed to stop. The river, the lights, the sounds of the city, everything faded until it was just them, Keanu. She whispered, but the words caught in her throat. "It's okay," he said gently, taking a step closer. "You don't have to say anything." But she wanted to. She wanted to tell him how much he meant to her, how much his kindness had changed her, how much she had come to depend on him. But fear, that old, familiar fear, held her back. Fear of losing what they had. Fear of ruining everything. So instead, she stepped back. "I think we should go," she said quietly. The moment broke like fragile glass. The walk back was silent, and when they parted ways, something unspoken hung in the air between them. Over the next few days, things felt different. Still warm, still friendly, but different. Their conversations were shorter, their hugs a little more careful, their laughter a little more restrained. They were both pretending nothing had changed, but deep down, they knew it had. And then, one night, everything came crashing down. Sandra was invited to a high-profile event, a film festival where she was being honored for her career. She invited Keanu to come with her, but he declined politely. "I think you should have this moment for yourself," he said. So she went alone. But when she arrived, she was met with whispers and flashing cameras, not because of her achievements, but because of the man standing beside her ex-boyfriend. A rumor had surfaced, one that linked her name romantically to a wealthy producer she had once worked with. It wasn't true, but in the cruel world of gossip, truth didn't matter. By the time she got home, the headlines were everywhere, and when she called Keanu to explain, he didn't pick up. She tried again the next day. No answer. A week passed. Still nothing. Panic turned into confusion. Confusion turned into fear. And fear turned into heartbreak. When she finally saw him again, at a charity event neither could skip. He was polite but distant, cordial but cold. "I didn't believe any of it," he said when she confronted him. "But it made me realize something. Maybe we're trying to turn this into something it's not meant to be." "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Maybe you're meant to heal, and I'm just meant to help you do that. Maybe that's all this is." Her heart shattered. "Do you really believe that?" He looked away, his silence louder than any answer, and in that silence, she walked away, tears blurring the city lights as she wondered how something so beautiful could fall apart so easily. But destiny wasn't done with them, because sometimes love doesn't bloom when everything is perfect. Sometimes it reveals itself when everything is falling apart, and their story was far from over. Love in the ruins. Night she walked away, the city felt colder than it had in years. The rain began to fall in thin sheets, soaking through her dress as she wandered the empty streets. Every step echoed with memories, laughter in late-night diners, whispered conversations under dim streetlights, moments that felt like the beginning of something extraordinary. Now, it all felt like a dream slipping away. She tried to tell herself it was for the best, that maybe Keanu was right. Maybe they were never meant to be anything more than the broken souls crossing paths, to help each other heal. But deep inside, a small, stubborn part of her heart refused to believe that. Meanwhile, Keanu sat alone in his apartment, the silence pressing against his chest like a weight. He told himself he had done the right thing, that stepping back was the selfless choice. She needed space, he thought. She needed clarity. But no matter how many times he repeated the words, they sounded hollow. Everywhere he turned, reminders of her lingered. The mug she left behind on his kitchen shelf, the scarf she forgot on his couch, the scent of her perfume that still clung faintly to his jacket. It wasn't just that he missed her, it was that he felt incomplete without her, and yet, he did nothing. Weeks passed. The headlines eventually faded. The world moved on, but they didn't. Both tried to return to normal life, but nothing felt normal anymore. Sandra threw herself into work, attending events and filming new projects, but every success felt empty. Keanu focused on charity work and small indie films, but his heart wasn't in it. They had built a space in each other's lives, and now that space was painfully, achingly empty, until one cold November evening. Keanu was attending a small fundraiser for a literacy foundation, a quiet event away from flashing cameras and red carpets. He was speaking with a group of students when he felt a familiar presence behind him. He turned, and there she was, Sandra. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, neither moved. She looked nervous, unsure, but determined. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," he replied, his voice quieter than he intended. "Can we talk?" They stepped out onto the balcony, where the city stretched below them in a sea of glittering lights. The silence between them was heavy, full of everything they hadn't said. "I've missed you," she said finally, her voice trembling. "More than I thought was possible." Keanu's breath caught, but he didn't speak. "I know you think I need to heal," she continued, "and maybe you're right. But healing doesn't mean shutting people out. It doesn't mean walking away from someone who's become a part of you." She paused, swallowing hard. "You're not just someone who helped me get through pain, Keanu. You're the reason I started believing in happiness again." His chest tightened. The walls he had built began to crack. "And what if I told you I'm terrified?" he whispered. "Of what?" "Of hurting you. Of not being enough. Of ruining the best thing that's ever happened to me." She stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. "Then let's be scared together. Because I'm terrified too. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." The words hit him harder than he expected. For months, he had convinced himself that walking away was the noble choice, that love meant letting her find herself first. But maybe love wasn't about waiting for perfect timing. Maybe it was about choosing each other despite the fear. Keanu exhaled slowly and reached for her hand. "I never stopped caring," he said. "Not for a second." "Then don't let this end here," she whispered. The space between them closed, and when he pulled her into his arms, it felt like coming home after a long, endless storm. The city roared beneath them, but in that moment, nothing else existed. For the first time, there were no doubts, no unspoken fears, no walls, just the hearts that had been broken and rebuilt, now beating in sync. The days that followed were different, lighter. They stopped pretending. They started calling each other more, meeting without excuses, laughing without hesitation. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were still insecurities, still moments of hesitation, but this time, they faced them together. They cooked dinners in each other's homes. They spent quiet weekends watching movies and talking about everything and nothing. They went on long motorcycle rides with no destination, just the open road and the freedom to be themselves. And with every shared moment, love, real, deep, unshakable love, grew between them. But just as everything was beginning to feel right, fate, unpredictable and cruel, threw them a curveball they never saw coming. A film project Sandra had committed to months before was finally moving forward. It wasn't just any project. It was a year-long shoot overseas. It was a dream role, one that could define her career. But it meant leaving. It meant distance. And distance was the one thing they had never prepared for. When she told him, Keanu smiled, even though it felt like his heart was splitting in two. "You have to do it," he said. "This is your dream. But what about us?" She whispered. "We'll figure it out," he said gently. Love doesn't disappear because of miles. But as she boarded the plane weeks later, watching him disappear into the crowd below, neither of them could shake the fear that maybe, just maybe, love wasn't always enough. Because while distance can't destroy love, it has a way of testing it. And their love was about to be tested more deeply than ever before. When love is tested, their port was crowded, noisy, full of goodbyes and reunions. But for Keanu and Sandra, it felt like the world had gone quiet. They stood close, holding hands as if letting go might break something sacred. The loudspeaker announced her flight boarding, and with each second that passed, the weight of what was coming pressed harder on both of them. "Promise me one thing," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Anything," he said. "Don't forget me." He smiled, that soft, steady smile that had always made her feel safe. "I couldn't forget you if I tried." Then came the hardest part, the final hug, the last kiss before distance stretched between them. She walked toward the gate without looking back because she knew if she did, she might never leave. And he stood there long after her plane had gone, staring at the empty sky, whispering a quiet prayer that love would be enough. The first few weeks were easier than they expected. They called every night, video chatted every weekend, and texted constantly. Time zones and busy schedules made things complicated, but they both put in the effort. And for a while, it worked. But as the months passed, cracks began to appear. Her days were consumed by filming, long hours, remote locations, limited signal. Sometimes their calls lasted only a few minutes. Sometimes days passed without a word. And while Keanu understood, the silence started to feel heavier. For Sandra, it was even harder. Every time she turned off the camera, she was alone. Every night she lay awake, wondering if the distance was slowly pulling them apart. And when interviews began linking her name to her charming co-star, purely speculation, but persistent nonetheless, the pressure grew. One evening, after a particularly long day, Sandra scrolled through her phone and saw a photo of Keanu at a charity event. He was smiling, standing beside a woman she didn't recognize. It was innocent. She knew that, but something in her chest twisted. Doubt, fear, loneliness. That night, she called him. It was late where he was, but he answered on the second ring. "Hey," he said softly. "I was just thinking about you. Are you okay?" She asked. "I miss you," he admitted, "but I'm okay." There was a pause, one of those long, fragile silences that say more than words. "Do you ever think," she asked hesitantly, "that maybe we're too far apart?" His heart sank. "Do you?" "I don't want to," she whispered. "But sometimes it feels like we're holding onto a memory more than a reality." "We're more than a memory, Sandra," he said gently. "What we have is real. Distance doesn't change that. But what if it changes us?" It was a question neither of them could answer. Weeks turned into months, and the distance grew heavier. Misunderstandings crept in where laughter used to be. Missed calls turned into unanswered messages. And one night, after a particularly painful argument about nothing and everything, the line went silent. For the first time since they had come together, they stopped talking. Days turned into weeks. Neither reached out. Both waited, too afraid and too proud to be the first. And in that silence, they began to wonder if this was how it ended. Not with a dramatic goodbye, but with a slow fading into nothing. But love, real love, doesn't disappear so easily. On a rainy night in December, Sandra's shoot wrapped early. She stood in her hotel room, staring at the ticket home she had impulsively booked days ago. She didn't know if he'd want to see her. She didn't even know if he'd be there. But she knew she had to try. 20 hours later, exhausted and trembling, she stood at his door. She almost turned around twice before she knocked. The door opened. Keanu stood there, surprised, barefoot, holding a mug of tea. For a moment, they just stared at each other. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi," he breathed. "I couldn't do it," she said, tears already streaming down her face. "I couldn't stay away. I don't care how hard it is. I don't care if we fight. I don't care if it's messy. I just know I'd rather struggle with you than live without you." He stared at her for a heartbeat and then pulled her into his arms. The hug wasn't dramatic. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and desperate and real. "I never stopped waiting," he whispered against her hair. Not for a second. In that moment, something broke, not their love, but the fear that had been choking it. They talked for hours, through tears and laughter, about everything they had bottled up. They made promises, not of perfection, but of effort, of choosing each other every day, even when it was hard. And slowly, they rebuilt. Months later, when Sandra walked a red carpet again, Keanu was by her side. When he launched a new project, she was in the front row, cheering him on. They traveled together, supported each other, built a life not around perfect circumstances, but around unwavering commitment. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It had heartbreak and mistakes and moments of doubt, but it was real, built on kindness, resilience, and the courage to love through uncertainty. And one quiet evening, years later, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Sandra turned to him and asked, "Do you ever think about how it all started?" He smiled, with silence, and a choice to be kind, and that was the truth. It hadn't started with fireworks or fate. It had started with kindness in the face of rejection, with understanding instead of judgment, with two broken hearts choosing to build something whole together, and that, more than anything, was why it lasted.